Welcome to the Tricord Advisors podcast, where we answer life's hard questions to help you make smart decisions with your money. I'm Jeremiah Lee, and this is Randy Barkley. We're both certified financial planners. I'm also a California licensed attorney. We are talking today about something that we hear from clients all the time, and we want to have this conversation openly with our listeners, is people have a concern and a fear that they either come to themselves or they hear on the radio or on TV or the talking heads, is that the U.S. is doomed, that the U.S. dollar is going to fall out of favor and the world's going to fall apart. And there's some of these things that, we don't know the future. Nobody does. But the parts that we want to talk about today is put some facts in here. Let's look at some numbers and some facts to say where the U.S. economy really is and where the dollar really is and what it would really take, or what it would really look like for the dollar to be fall out of favor in the world.
Yeah, and I think the conversation I've had with many people, clients as well as prospective clients, is that they seem to have a bias that there is a Chinese, Russian, Iran, North Korea coalition, and there is a real threat to the reserve currency that the dollar enjoys worldwide. And I've got a lot of articles over the last several months that we want to share with people, and just the information that is really critically important that you understand. And again, the dollar, in our opinion, has no chance of falling out of reserve status. The political intrigue between the liberals and the conservatives is causing people a lot of angst. But a lot of it is their bias, and their bias is shading what I call the facts. Just give me the facts, man, and let me make decisions based upon that.
Yeah, when you say reserve status, just so we're on the same page, is there's a lot of countries that will hold excess currency as a reserve.
Right.
If they need cash quickly, if they anything they might need. So a lot of countries around the world, the U.S. of course holds U.S. dollars. But so does a lot of the world. A lot of the world is using U.S. dollars as their reserve currency. And, just as to put a number on it, the yuan, which is China's currency, is currently 2.75% of the world's reserves.
2.75. Now, folks, listen to that. 2.75.
Yeah, not a significant number.
No.
And that includes China. That includes everybody of who is included in this, who's holding reserves. And there's a number of reasons why. And, everyone I think generally knows that the U.S. is used for oil trade. The U.S. dollar is used for international trade. It's used for reserves.
In fact, it's really important to point out is that on a daily basis, $7.5 trillion are traded daily in transactions. And of that, the last year there was $32 trillion that was traded in global trade. But the dollar is on that side 88% of the time. Right?
On one of the sides of the transaction. So people are using dollars.
For sure.
And the reason they do that is if someone went to buy, say, U.S. wheat, they have to pay for it in U.S. dollars. And so they say they were in Europe somewhere. They would take their euros, trade them for dollars, and then use those dollars to buy U.S. wheat. And that happens all around the world on a regular basis as people are buying dollar-denominated assets, whether it's oil or steel or wheat. And so because of that, people need U.S. dollars, not just to trade with the U.S., but also to trade with each other, because they'll say this is a common shared currency.
And the simple truth is that the Chinese yuan is just not convertible. And even where China has tried to put influence, let's say in Eastern Asia, in Asian countries.
In Africa as well, yeah.
Yeah, in Africa. Well, they'll use yuan, but what was really telling is that those countries will immediately convert that yuan to dollars because they know that they can't use the yuan to buy anything significant. Nobody will take it. So they immediately convert it to dollars, and it's used for that.
Yeah, and these infrastructure projects that China is funding would be, somewhere in East Asia or some other country that they would take a loan from China and they would build roads and bridges and ports with it. But like you said, they're converting these to dollars and using that to fund everything. And so it's a picture of how you actually get things done. And then that number you said about the international currency transactions, that 88% of them today are in U.S. dollars.
Right.
If we were to look back in time, and a number of people say, well, we're on this decline. The U.S. is fading. It's changing.
Its dominance is fading. Yeah.
Yeah. So in 1989. The same calculation, the U.S. made up 90% of all world currency transactions, or on one side or the other, and today it's 88%. So a 2% change is insignificant to say over the last 30 30 plus years.
And remember in that period of time that China became a part of the world trade, became a favored nation, right? So their economy grew. It grew tremendously.
Yeah, I mean, India and China have grown tremendously.
Right.
The U.S. has changed a lot of how we hold jobs, where we hold jobs. The world has shifted significantly from 1989 until today. But in that, our economic dominance in being a world currency has barely shifted.
Barely
shifted. I think that's a key
shifted.
thing to think about. The strength that when people think back to 1990, the strength that the U.S. had in the world, and then comparing that to today, say as far as the reserve status and the use of the dollar as a world currency, it's practically unchanged, which is, I think, a testament of where we are still at today.
Yeah, and again, I think that politically everybody looks at the news or reads or whatever, and they get their biases reinforced. But what we want to do today is to really bring back what are the facts? What are the facts? And the dollar is still the king reserve currency in the world.
Yeah.
And we see nothing that would take that away.
Yeah, and the strength, and that's a good kind of comment, is that why is it that? There's a number of things, and a few of them is our capital markets. So if someone has extra dollars, like you were saying, that you want, if you can't spend it, if you can't trade it, it's not that valuable. The U.S. currency, the U.S. dollar, can, one, be traded with other countries, but two, we have the U.S. capital markets, the stock markets. And we have a depth and a breadth of markets, that allows people to access funds, to trade funds. And also, there's transparency, because the SEC and a number of regulations that, take it or leave it, whether you like it, it allows a lot of oversight, a lot of transparency. We don't have under the table bribes the same way that other countries might. And the other two pieces, which I think are really key here, is why the U.S. has such a dominant currency. Is also our military. We're not going to be taken over and the dollar just go away by force.
Right.
And we also have a legal system that if there is an issue, if there is a mistake on the markets, if there is a change, there's a place of courts that people can go to internationally. They come to the U.S., bring a court case, and they can recover. And we have a functioning legal system that provides justice. And whether people like our system or not, it's stable and it's powerful as compared to many around the world.
Yeah, and again, people they throw stones at our system and they think that we're weak politically, that we're we're weak militarily. And there's a lot of evidence to point that there is change going on. But when you actually look at the core aspects of, and we can in this radio program, we can go a case after case after case that would show that the dollar is continuing to increase. But more importantly, America, the dominance of America in the overall growth in the last, and we're going back, 30 years.
Yep.
So if there was a dramatic change in the strength of the U.S. and the dollar, there's been a lot of political intrigue between, now and 30 years ago.
Yeah.
How's that had an impact upon our overall, right?
And what we'll be talking, and we're going to jump into this next, is part of the U.S. economy is that we're not just talking about the absolute figures, have we grown, have we shrunk, but it's saying relative to the world. And we know that China has grown significantly. We know that India's economy has grown significantly. We know that the EU continues to grow, but also struggle at times as they go. And so some of the numbers we're going to talk about in just a moment are relative numbers to say what percentage of the world GDP did we make up then, 30 years ago? And what do we make up now? And knowing that everything has increased, and we also have increased, but how much relative to others?
Yeah, I mean, I always come back to it as the standpoint, if I'm a criminal and I'm trying to get illicit gains, and I'm going to hold whatever I've made into some currency, am I going to hold it in yuan or am I going to hold it in dollars? And when they get drug busts, when they do money laundering, guess what they find, folks? They don't find yuan there. They find dollars.
Yeah.
Yep.
And for a moment, Bitcoin, people thought Bitcoin was going to be the answer there, but there's a number of FBI cases where they had to crack down and run through Bitcoin through the ledger and find the people. Right. And I think the criminal element was realized it's not, if it's a small crime, the FBI may not run you down, but in a big issue, it's not secure. It's not stable in the same way that people think. So you're right, people run to dollars.
Yeah, and again, that's one of the reasons why China has cracked down on cryptocurrencies, because it's a way in which to transfer wealth out of China. Because if you're a Chinese citizen, you can only take out $50,000 of currency. So it's one way to go to credit. And they cut it off at the knees. They said no, because it was a way that the Chinese citizens can transfer wealth out of China and get it into some other country, like the U.S. like Canada, like
Yeah.
Australia, places like that. So,
Yeah. Well, why don't we transition a little bit into the U.S. economy? So GDP, the gross domestic product, is a big number that a lot of people use, economists use to kind of measure the output. What are we doing? What are we producing? So in 1990, the U.S. GDP made up 30% of the world's output. In today, 2023, we're roughly the same. So that means despite China's growth, despite India's growth, we used to be 30% of the world's output. We're still roughly 30% of the world's output.
and the world's output has grown. So that
Yes.
means we are a share, we're 30%, but it's a much larger number, but we still are maintaining our GDP presence, right?
And part of what underpins the dollar, like we talked about, is the strength of our military, the strength of our legal system, but also just the strength of our economy, that we are not fading, or
We're capitalistic.
that we are continuing to expand. The other important number is the larger. In 1990, going back 30 years, the U.S. made up 40% GDP of the G7. That's the largest 7 countries.
G7 are the largest economies in the world.
Yeah. We were 40% in 1990. Today we're 58%. And so,
okay,
we've
folks,
actually
did you hear
expanded.
that? Do you hear that? In the last 30 years of the G7, we've actually increased our dominance as far as our percentage of gross domestic product that we produce.
Yep. It's significant. And I think it's, again, you think back to 1990, how much globalization has occurred? How many factories have gone overseas? How has that all shifted? But the idea that what we're still producing, whether it's physical goods, intellectual property goods, services, that we are still producing at not just a similar rate and percentage of the world that we used to before, but actually we're increasing relative to others. I think it's hard to even, these numbers you talked about earlier, they're in trillions of dollars, and it's hard for my brain to understand trillions of dollars.
But percentages work. I mean, again, we can talk about specific dollars, but percentages, the dominance that the U.S. has in relationship to the reserve currency we're talking about, but also it's all based upon our gross domestic product. In other words, how much do we produce as a nation? And if you look at the total population of the United States, we are a very productive people. In fact, we're more productive than any other nation on the world, on a per person basis. So anyway, we're going to continue this conversation. There's a lot of details. In fact, we're not going to be able to get through everything because there's just so much information. But stay tuned to us. We're going to continue our conversation about the dollar and the strength for the future.